Well, you know, one of the things that we do in the business world is to try to be all things to the people with whom we are doing business. We want to be socially correct. We want to be aware of their likes and dislikes because we're trying to make a buck off of them, right? Well, I came across this with Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin's been in business a long time, right? They have a good product. But their board of directors got together and started thinking about it, and they said, you know, we are really being inconsiderate of a major part of our clientele. We need to address that. I mean, we have got, in areas, we have got Catholics, Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian. They're probably offended by this name. So they're opening a whole new chain of stores, same menu, same donuts, same colors, different name. I just thought you might enjoy that. As we think about putting on the mind of Christ, and we've been talking about Philippians 2 and 5 for quite a while now, to have the same mind attitude that Christ Jesus had. Last Sunday evening, I went to, Donna and I went to a graduation party for one of our young ladies, and she had taken the book, the Bible that we gave her Sunday morning, and had it on a stand and asked everybody to highlight their favorite verse and go to the back and put their name and the verses that highlighted so she'd know who had done what. And this has always been one of my favorites, and I think it's very relevant as we think about Philippians 2 and 5. And in the King James Version, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed, and the word there is the English word metamorphos, to go from one state to another, to the worm turned into the butterfly. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The first time I read this in the New International Version was a real aha moment for me. The NIV says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God, to lay your bodies on the altar, to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. And this is the phrase that really caught my attention. This is truly the way you worship him. You see, in my growing up, worship was something you went to. It happened in a building with 4 walls. We put a sign on our door that, remember these? Enter to worship, leave to serve. There are 5 acts of worship, and you had to do all 5 or it didn't count. You just wasted your time. But what Paul is saying, and I think this is a good translation, is that our work is worship. The way we live our lives is worship. And it's something that happens 7 days a week. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person. And then this is different from the King James too. And I like it. It says, let God change you, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. This takes some of the burden away from us and And we allow God to be an actor in that process. When we think, I just can't do it, well, then we have the assurance from Paul that God is willing to interact with us to change that mind, to reform that mind. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. And I thought that was a very appropriate passage to go along with our putting on the mind of Christ as we seek to discover the heart of Christ. Well, I have a little short video clip for you, and this is John Ortberg again. We've seen several of his. And this one is a conversation he's having with another religious leader, and they're talking about women and the role of women. And the thing that I want to communicate is how totally countercultural Jesus was in his relationship with women. And they point that out in this little clip. You know, in our heritage, in our tradition, Churches of Christ, we have a law regarding women. They should be seen and not heard. They may teach other women and unbaptized boys, but never men. They must never stand in the pulpit on of the holy sanctuary, except maybe to clean it, but never on Sunday. They may pass the communion left or right while seated, but never standing. Of course, we can't take care of that now. We don't pass the communion anymore, so we don't have that conflict. They're allowed to sing, but never lead, and they may give money as much and as often as they like. Does that kind of sum it up? Is that pretty close? Well, we could spend several Sundays talking about how we came to that conclusion and why our exegesis is so faulty, but that's not our purpose this morning.
Hey, Journey Pastor John here with John Ortberg, who is the author of Who Is This Man? And we're using this book to talk about the impact of the life of Jesus on our world. Today we're talking about women. John, you stated that roughly half of the households the Apostle Paul mentions in his various letters in the New Testament that really form the infrastructure of the early church are headed by women. The role of women in the community of Jesus was truly revolutionary. Talk a little bit more about the impact of Jesus on how women were and are viewed today.
Yeah, again, it's often not understood by our world, the impact of Jesus on the lives of women. In the ancient world, it's thought that there was a huge imbalance of men to women, that for every 1,400,000 men, there were about 1 million women. And the reason is that when a child was born, if it was the wrong gender, and that gender was woman, it would be much more common to be left to die of exposure because women were not wanted. But the followers of Jesus remembered that they followed a man who taught women. In Luke chapter 8, there's a very interesting story about Jesus and the 12, his disciples, and then other women who, by the way, were actually the ones paying for the journey. Were traveling around from town to town together in a way that would have been very scandalous in the ancient world. Yeah. And Jesus, as a rabbi who was committed to teaching women as well as men, created a community in which the value of women, the dignity of women to learn. In John chapter 4, there's another story where Jesus' disciples come, and it says they're surprised to find him talking with a woman because rabbis would not do that. And so over the centuries, the elevation of the status, dignity, worth, and role of women in the community of Jesus changed the way that society would look at women. That's part of the way that Jesus impacted our world.
As I look back at all of the pattern-based legalistic teachings that I have propagated over my lifetime, and which I now repent of, I think maybe the way that we have kept women from exercising their spirit giftedness is maybe one of the most egregious for me personally. I just think it was just a terrible miscarriage of justice. And I'm speaking not ex cathedra. This is Lanny. This isn't the elders of the Southeast Church of Christ or anybody else, except maybe Mike. Well, in 2005, a lady by the name of Katrina made a very unwanted, unwelcomed visit to the Gulf Coast. And by the time she got through, the city of New Orleans was a lake. Massive, massive damage and destruction, heartache. But even in the worst of those catastrophes, we can always find some little sliver of a silver lining. And for those of us here at Southeast, that silver lining is a lady named Margurite. Come on up, Margurite. Margurite is a refugee from Katrina. She landed in our midst, thankfully, and we appreciate it so much. She is a wife, mother, and grandmother. She is a Bible student, an excellent teacher, and my very good friend. And she's going to tell us this morning what Jesus means to her. There you go, baby.
Lanny could talk a bear into being a Christian. He's getting on my nerves. I'm going to do partly what Lanny asked me to, and partly what I want to do. At one time, and I may have mentioned this to you a while back, that I don't like the word suffered with, but I lived through many years of severe clinical depression. It was so debilitating that I was as near non-functional without having to be hospitalized or, being totally taken care of. I was functional to the extent that I could get a shower. And I could think, but at the time I didn't know part of my brain was working. And I did some things like cut my hair really short and had a curly afro. And so it looked like I had made this major change and that I was in charge of myself, but it was to keep me from having to see my hair out of order. I had this sense that I had to have the appearance of being okay. But if you looked at me closely for more than 5 minutes and you knew me, you would know that I was not okay. However, I didn't stay in anyone's company long enough for them to see that other than my family. So in terms of background, I was in the workforce probably for about 22 years. So I was probably in my mid-40s, early 40s perhaps. And I wasn't sleeping, and I knew something was terribly wrong. Well, in the course of my life, growing up in the South and having hindrances that was beyond my immediate control, I was used to going beyond. And you say, well, this is the way it is, and you just keep forward. And I didn't display an extraordinary amount of confidence, but I always knew you have to kind of keep going. And so I was trying to keep going. So what I'm going to talk to you about is not what was in my life before the depression. The part that I'm doing that Lenny didn't particularly ask me to do is I simply want to tell you the symptoms, the impact on my life with clinical depression. One of the things that I found talking to Christians and people in the church is the moment you say something that had an implication of emotional, this is my bias, emotional, mental. I'm going to pray for you. Well, I want your prayers, but I also want you to hear from me and have some empathy versus that I turned away from God or I'm worshiping Satan. And so I didn't find that, even people who I was very close to be accepting, because depression is like anything else. Oftentimes it's temporary after a death in the family, a loss of someone, after losing a job, and then life goes on. And oftentimes you do so much better after that. That was the norm. You just keep on going. And God's going to take care of it. God does take care of it, but in His time and not our time. And I couldn't understand how God could let anyone have that level of hurt and dread and mental suffering. And to just communicate what it felt like, it was the same dread most of the time, but settled in when you hear that your mother has died. It was that level of dread. Or that your son got critically ill and lost his hearing, or had asthma in the hospital and he's in intensive care and may die. It's that kind of dread, and it doesn't go away. And so, but I knew, I didn't say God over matter, I said mind over matter. Just keep going. And it befuddled me that I couldn't get beyond that. So I'm not here to talk about my faith or my Christianity in that moment, but just to talk about what it feels like. Now, when I left the workplace, my doctor told me to see a psychiatrist immediately. In my wisdom, I chose to make an appointment with a psychologist because I just needed counseling. Psychiatrist was a step too far, that I may have to take medication, the idea of a mental hospital, all those things were beyond what I could accept in my natural mind. So I saw this psychologist, and within talking to me, I would suspect about 10 minutes. He said, "Excuse me." He left, came back a few minutes. In that little time, he had made an appointment with me for a psychiatrist, and he says, "You need medical care first." So I saw the psychiatrist, and he immediately prescribed medication for me. The medication he prescribed, I went to the drugstore. And when I went to the drugstore, it was drugstore back then, not pharmacist. Went to the drugstore, it was a Rite Aid. Left my prescription there and walked around the drugstore. What I noticed immediately as I was looking for something, cost $2 to pick up and buy to fill the time, picked up something, I can't remember what it was, got in line, but I noticed that I didn't recognize things in the drugstore. Not only didn't I recognize some things that I thought should be familiar, I may have recognized them but couldn't give it a name, what I was seeing. Not only that, I couldn't read what it was. So I'm standing in line with my little $2.80, whatever it was, and I'm thinking, I wonder if I know my ABCs. So I silently start saying A, B, C, D. I don't want to start crying. I think I got to E, but for sure I didn't get to F, G, and H. I know I didn't get that far. And things were just jumbled. So I got out of the line because this time it's an acknowledgement to me at that level. I'm in deeper trouble than I could have imagined. So I walk around to go into the children's section where the stationery is to find a little book that I could read. But what I found was, I started to bring it, the pad, you know the little ABC pad with the little dotted lines? And that was a gift to me because now I could read the ABCs in order. So it wasn't that I didn't recognize the alphabets. I couldn't say them in order. So I had something to take home with me. So I left the pharmacist with my tablet and with my prescription. I immediately start saying A, B, C, D in little segments and writing them out. If you ever see me, I have a pen in my hand. So I'm writing them out, writing them out, writing them out. So I write them out, write them out. And I don't know how long it took me to be able to say my ABCs in order. It took quite a while because I would learn them or relearn them, and then I would forget them. But if nothing else, I'm diligent, kept going. Then I always knew my name and how to spell my name. But when I wrote it, my handwriting was unrecognizable, and I had a fairly legible handwriting. So I did ABCs, and I would write my name over and over again. I ran out of paper. So I had my husband pick up from Sam's, you know those where you made, they have packs of paper, loose leaf paper, come in $2.50 and have 4 or 5 in a pack. Over time, I used all of that. This part of my finger was just black, and so I got Band-Aids to put on. And he'd say, "What are you writing every morning? What are you writing?" And I couldn't tell him writing my ABCs, you know, so I hid it from everybody. He knew I wasn't well because I cried all the time. I could cry 10, 12, 15 hours a day, just tearing. But I don't know why, I know there's a psychology, I never let the tears run down. I always had something to wipe them. And if you didn't see tears, they were just behind the eyelid. But back to seeing this doctor. So I go to this doctor. So I saw a psychiatrist for a half hour, and he followed my medications. But I saw the psychologist for an hour, and it was a weekly. So the first time I went there was a parking spot. It was about 5 minutes from my house, right in front of the office. My panic was such that I just had this churn in my chest cavity. You know how anxiety is? You just, like if you get shocked by something, the churn just stayed there. And I could actually say I never felt good. But I would look like this on the outside. But I never felt good. So I go to the doctor week 1, and he asked me something. I guess I answered it. Week 2, the psychiatrist, week 3. Then it hit me one day after my 3rd visit, I believe. He would ask me each time I would come, "What, Margurite?" First thing, "What day is it?" And I couldn't answer him. And so, again, I could think, but didn't know I could think. I realized that so I can let him know I'm not as bad off, when I realized that before the next appointment, I looked up the date on the calendar, say, "It's Tuesday, January, da-da-da-da-da. It's Tuesday, January, da-da-da-da-da." I must have said it 1,000 times. But before I got to him on that 4th visit, I pulled into the parking lot. And I was in Rochester, New York, wet snow blizzard, but it was snowing. The parking spot that I'd parked in the previous 3 times wasn't vacant. I had to go down a few car lengths. When I turned into that parking spot, I must have sat there for at least for 10 minutes or more because I didn't know where I was. It was just that different. So I got out of the car eventually, started walking back to the way I pulled in. When I got in front of that spot where I'd parked 3 times before, I saw the office building. I'd go in. And even when you're depressed, you can be arrogant. I walked in and said, "Today is Tuesday, January, blah, 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 blah." He said, "Well, that's good, Margurite." I could kill that man right now. He said, "What season is it?" Like, and I think if I could have thought of the seasons, I probably could have figured it out because there was snow and sleet outside. I couldn't think of the seasons. And if I thought about them, I couldn't think of them in order to figure it out. So that was devastating. The other thing that was one of those moments that just kind of take you back because I couldn't figure out the season. So it was those little things that you ought to be able to recall. So he told me that after a while, that he would start, after a few months, they said that I had been on every class, a combination of classes of medication that, not every medication, but every class of medication, and that my body was physically resistant to the medication. So they have to get me ready for long-term disability. Well, fortunately, I worked at a company that had a year's long of short-term disability. That's a pretty good amount of short-term disability. So in my mind, I have maybe 7 months to go. Why is he getting me ready for short-term disability? Doesn't he think I can get better? And he says, well, we have to do this, Margurite, because we have to have you prepared and just in case, because you may not be ready to return to work. So at this time, he has to say something, kind of get me a little bit more stable in terms of where my mind is going. So he does all of that. Now, over to the psychologist that I see every week, I've been seeing him for about 5, maybe 6 sessions. And he says, today, we had a good day. And I say, well, why is that? He says, this is the first time I've asked you something that you answered with something then, I don't know. And I couldn't recall what we were talking about. And I have a reasonable sense of how to talk. But the answer was always, I don't know. Like, I don't know, it's Tuesday. I don't know. But I don't know what it was that I said. And so eventually, the doctor did want to try one more medication for me. And I can't remember what it was, but it had something to do with some kind of inhibitor. And with that, you had to be very careful how you took it because of the ramifications. You can only eat certain foods, and if they were cooked food, it was to be eaten 5 minutes of it being cooked. So I mistakenly said something that made my sister know that I had been out of work. I had been out of work a year and hadn't shared it with my family. I was the private person. And she said, a year? So the next thing I know, I'm on a plane going to New Orleans in order to take this medication. So the doctor's written out the prescription for me. I start taking it once I get into New Orleans. But the airport was so difficult to navigate. So before I got to the gate, this is in the 90s, so when I didn't get to the gate, when you go up to the desk at that time, and I showed them my driver's license, I have everything out. I always prepared ahead of time. But the problem with me preparing ahead of time, I would forget that I prepared or what I did. And so when I got ready, I got my bags checked, and my husband was with me up to that point, made sure I had my driver's license to put it back. So when I get behind the concourse to go to the gate, I started walking, and I had the person at the counter to write the number very large and circle it in black and in red. I could see red. So I see the gates, and let's say the gates is going down for where I have to go. So I go. Then, after a while, I see the numbers are going up, which meant I had turned around and didn't realize I had turned around. But I figured that out. So I stopped, I turned around, and every gate I asked them, where is gate? Where is gate? So I wouldn't turn around. I get to the gate, I get on the plane, and when the flight ended, it was said that this was the last flight for this plane. And people got off the plane. I got up to go too. And I dropped back down in the seat. And at that time, there was no problems because people were still going, so I'm just gonna wait and take my time. But I sat and I sat and I sat. Everyone was off the plane. Now, this is before 9/11. Everyone was off the plane, and I'm still there. The cleaning crew comes in, and they just clean up around me. And I'm still telling myself, get up, get up. You know, I always tell them, I'm always taught, get up, get up. I don't get up. Now, enough time has passed, obviously, that my husband has called my family and whoever's going to pick me up at the airport, and there's always this one brother who's in charge. And eventually, and I love my brother today for this, he got on the plane and he simply said, "Are you ready?" I nodded. He took my purse, put it over his shoulder. I caught his arm, and we walked off the plane. Now, I came back, and with my mother-in-law helping me with my food, she would prepare the food, see that I took the medication before or after, whatever the situation was, and at the same time. So she would prepare the food, and I would eat it. And I was intent on her not doing any complicated meals, something very quick and simple. And or just the salads, but make sure there was no preservatives and all of that. So I had 2 meals a day. Don't want to be a bother to anyone. So I would have a phone visit every day about how I was doing with the medication. It had to be monitored that closely because of my resistance, I guess, and the impact of the medication. So I've talked to I can't remember how many times I talked to the doctor. It wasn't weeks. I don't know if it was a week, but I talked to the doctor. He would say, "How are you doing?" I guess trying to figure out how I'm reacting. This particular day, not a long time in, he says, "Let me talk to your stepmother." And you can be arrogant even when you're depressed. What do you want to talk to my stepmother for? I'm the patient. But I didn't say anything. That was my doctor. I give her the phone, and she's saying, "Yes, doctor," and answering him. I mean, they're having a conversation about me. So she gives me the phone back. He tells me to get off the medication immediately. And because I'm studious about things, I said, "Well, can I go to a lower dosage, or do I have to be weaned off it? I've been on it a few days." He says, "Margurite, you're not at a therapeutic dose. You haven't been on it long enough to be weaned off it, but you need to get off of it." So I get off the medication. And eventually, I get on the plane to go back home. When I got on that plane to go back home, I was sitting in the gate to go back to Rochester. You had to change planes. I was on the last leg, and I was so proud because I was able to change planes and get to the gate on my own. I don't know how long it took, but I got there. And Al made sure there was enough time. There wasn't one of those quick ones. When I got to that gate, apparently everyone was calling around, "Where's Margurite? Where's Margurite?" Apparently. And the lights had been lowered. Everyone had gone. The last plane in that section was gone. And a cart came around, and a guy came to pick me up, to take me to where the last plane was to go to Rochester. And at the time that when you go to the gate, you know, when you get ready to go onto the concourse to go to the gates, there's a second check with your ID. Couldn't find my ID. But I met some really charitable people along the way. I left this little business card because it was red and I could see it. I left it with my driver's license. I take it out and I'll put it down, but not in my purse. This lady comes up. I'm backtracking a bit. She comes up and she says, I think someone needs this. That was mine with all my ID, a couple of credit cards, and $300. She just, and I hand it. But by the time I get ready to go to the concourse, I don't see my driver's license. So this woman, one of the attendants there, came and she said, well, don't you have? I said, I can't find my driver's license. I had it to get to this point, but I don't have it. I think I've misplaced it. She said, well, you must have something with maybe with anything that has a picture on it. We'll accept that. She said, well, let's just look through it. So we're looking through my wallet. And she says, well, what's this? Maybe we can use this. You know what the disc was? And I couldn't see it. It was my driver's license. I just couldn't see it. So my physical eyes, my vision was excellent, but my mental eyes were not. And so I can go on and on and on, day in and day out. One doctor said, my psychologist says, Margurite, I think if you stop driving, you will never start again. So I continued to drive. And I can remember 4 lanes of traffic, and I've turned into the traffic thinking I'm turned into a driveway, and my car did a 360 because I'm on ice, and the car's coming to me, and I wouldn't repeat the names that I think they were mouthing to me. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, and there's always tears. And so that's just situation after situation, and all that turmoil and dread and not being able to navigate and get from A to B, and your husband taking you everywhere you have to go, to church, and anywhere he wasn't working, he's taking me. And I was this independent woman, you know, and if I took a shower, I had to go back into the bathroom and see if the shower door was wet or if the towel was wet. It never occurred to me to see in my person if I had taken a shower. You know, those kind of things. So I just wanted to give you a sense of depression is mental, but so much of it is in the brain. And about 7 years ago here, when I was here, 2020, I'm going to wrap up in it. 2020 had a special on, and it was 2 women that had clinical depression, and they were ranging around the 20-year mark, and I couldn't wait for it to come on. Both of them both of them were offered ECT. I call it shock therapy, convulsive therapy, electrical convulsive therapy. One opted not to do it, and one both of them did it. One had terrible effects. And so, of course, you know, I wouldn't do it because fear, which one would think I would gravitate, not to the one it helped, but the one that it didn't. So that's the one thing that I didn't do. But in all of this, though, there was an experimental thing that went on. And they went into this woman's brain, and they had an instrument, and I'm sure it was microscopic in terms of, and when it came on, they were doing the surgery, and it says, how are you doing? And she says, almost like this, I feel the same way I always feel. And she had that really sad voice. So they would ask her periodically, how are you doing? She would say the same thing, the way I've always felt the last 20 years. Then she said, I feel something. I don't know what I'm feeling. That went on for a little bit. She says, oh my God, I haven't felt this way in 20 years. I saw that as God's real life situation that increased my hope. There's hope in God, in God's time, but He put people, situations, and circumstances in your life that give you a more tangible thing to hope for. It may not work, but it was something. And that was the first time I saw something that I latched on to in real life. I got significantly better, but not without it. But the key to the people here is that everyone in this that I met Linda Fridge, everyone embraced me. And the Bible study was so good that I couldn't leave it. And I told everyone, I was looking unconsciously for a black congregation. But I couldn't leave here because of the Bible study and the graciousness of the people. And I've made progress ever since. But I still have that experimental Area 25 or whatever area it was in my pocket as something to go to. But I can go on and fill a book for 15 years of that kind of stuff, and you're crying every day. So when someone tells you they have a mental illness, please think it may be something that they did in terms of Christianity or turning against God. I don't know. But I know so much of it is the brain, and the brain is an organism. But now I understand why we don't judge. We just accept and see and pray. So I'm getting tired now, and the time is gone. So that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. And there's so much that we don't know and don't understand. And my goodness, we need to be so gracious to one another. We need to be so understanding. Even when we don't understand, so patient. I know that was hard for you, dear, and I appreciate it so much. Well, our time is just about up, and that's just fine. I told Marguerite not to worry about the clock, that what she had to say is something we all need to hear, and very relevant to seeking the heart of Jesus. Because what we don't know and what we don't understand and what we ignore, Jesus never does. He always knows. And his forgiveness is immense because of it. Well, we still didn't get to our breakdown on the Gospel of Luke, but we'll do that next week, Lord willing. And unless somebody has something they would care to add, we've got a couple of minutes if anybody wants to add. Come on, Jeff. Yeah, we're going to have to be quick. Our time is, they're assembling at the gate already. So.
I like the way you said we don't know what time. We don't understand anything about what time it is and what time, except God does know what time it is and stuff like that. But at one point when we go up to heaven, when we all be there,
We're gonna know, right?
There won't be no tears, no tears, no wine,
No depression.
no rescue, and and then we will know what time, why you said that.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. No tears in heaven.
That's what I said.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will be here. Why I'm here today is why we got the life group. And I will be here on the 28th.
We'll look forward to it, brother. Thank you.
And I'm always glad to be around Southeast.
We're always glad to have you around Southeast. You're a special brother. We appreciate you. All right, our time is up. Have a wonderful, God bless week.